It's getting connected to the cloud server. So this is welcome. My name is Uma Dinsmore-Tuli, and I'm here on behalf of Yoni Shakti, the movement to eradicate abuse of women in yoga and to reclaim yoga as a tool for healing and justice. And I'm speaking with Tanya Forgan. Greetings and good morning, Tanya.
Thank you, Uma. Good morning, and thank you so much for having me here. I'm really, really grateful. Thank you.
So it's delightful that Tanya is here. I wanted to sort of set a little bit of a scene, and then we're going to move into a conversation about yoga for healing, yoga for justice, and reclaiming yoga as a tool that's really helpful and nourishing for us all. And Tanya, love, we met in a very nourishing event. It wasn't actually at a yoga event. We only met because we have daughters of similar age, and I think this is really relevant because we're thinking about our adolescent daughters, and we met at a beautiful ceremony for supporting the first menstrual periods for girls, didn't we? Supporting, educating girls.
Absolutely. With Tessa, with lovely Tessa.
That's it. So a shout out to Tessa.
Yeah.
Tessa. She's got her name Venuti.
Venuti.
Yeah. So, and I feel, I wonder if you could speak a little bit about, so we were there as mothers, but we also realized we were both yoginis, so we've had a connection. That was only kind of around last year, but I'd like to hear a little bit about like how long you've been practicing yoga, and like clearly you're in a place where yoga is a nourishment to you now. I wondered if you'd speak about that a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. I'd love to. So I've been practicing yoga since the late 90s, and I really feel it's important now, and I'm kind of stepping into my own vulnerability to share my journey in this way. And my journey with yoga has been really bumpy. It's been a real love-hate relationship, a bit like Marmite, really. And I'm very glad that the story so far has a happy ending. But first of all, I'd like to share the bumpiness. So I started practicing yoga in the late 90s, and it was in a very dynamic practice. You know, I had all the gear, the tops with the slogans on, skinny clad lycra, trying to bend myself into shapes, you know, that my body couldn't do. Really in that, you know, I look back now and go like, oh gosh, who was that girl? But really in the kind of guru worship mode, you know, going into classes and really being sold benefits. This will do that. If you do this, fold forward, it will prevent that. If you do that. And I believed it, and I was hanging on every word. You know, my life at that particular time was in the city, in London, commuting, highly stressed. And it gave me hope that life could be good, you know, in this very anxious state. So I kind of really, I was sold yoga at that particular stage of life, and I was a very good purchaser. I bought it, I hung on to its every word, and that kind of took me into my teacher training. I became a teacher, I trained, and my teacher training had many wonderful benefits. It was a great journey for many reasons, but I actually found that I was in this real, what I call kind of push dynamic with myself, of always trying to get, you know, just a little bit further in a posture. Could just, you know, get my hand an inch closer to the ground. And that's when my injury started to happen. So my first injury was a rotator cuff. Awful, absolutely excruciating pain. And I worked through it, I worked with it, you know, I nurtured it to the best of my ability at that time. But I kept pushing because I didn't know any other way. I finished my training, I got my certificate, and I went out into the big wide world of teaching. And within weeks of teaching, I did what I did on very regular occasions, which was to take myself into a headstand, not in a class, at home. And as I came out of the headstand, I instantly felt very poorly. I couldn't make sense of the world around me, and my speech started to go funny, and everything just became quite distorted, and I couldn't work out what was going on. Anyway, that was the start of a very challenging journey, or what I now call the dark night of my soul. I went through various forms of Western medicine, trying to understand from that point why everything was such hard work. And it got worse and worse and worse. And my body just went into complete collapse. And that complete collapse took me into bed for over a year. Just literally stopped. All my internal systems didn't do what they were supposed to do. And it was a really tough journey. Even walking was something that I had to have my husband help me do at the time.
Tanya.
So, yeah.
That sounds incredibly tough. I'm interested during this time that you were recovering. It was like a yoga related injury. So did you completely stop any kind of yoga connection, or where was your teacher were they any part of what was happening to you?
Yeah, so I stopped yoga. I literally stopped yoga completely. I hated yoga at that particular time. I was like, yoga I didn't want to know. Didn't because yoga in my mind at that time was physical practice. What I came to realize that was that actually I was just about to meet yoga, really meet yoga. And my support network at that time dropped away, literally overnight. It dropped away because I was no longer somebody that could be sold to. I wasn't in that dynamic of look how I can touch my toes. So all of the people that had been selling to me, they lost interest. It was, it's a really tough journey at that particular time.
Wow.
So I was in bed and I was, there in bed, having to meet myself. There was nowhere to run at that point. Yeah, there was nowhere to run. At that particular time, life brought me one particular very sincere, beautiful yoga teacher, like very sincere soul, who came by my side and held my hand through that particular stage of time. He was a blessing, really. And he just showed me, he was like, what you've been practicing isn't really yoga. What you're learning now is yoga. Are you willing to meet yourself? Are you willing to dismantle or to surrender to being dismantled? And I was like, no, no, I'm not. But I had no choice.
Oh, and I salute your courage in speaking of this, Tanya, because the idea that yoga causes injury and that it actually damages people and as you say, dismantled your life to the degree that this was arising is something I think gets a little swept under the carpet. Mostly, people are like, oh yeah, yoga's been good for this, that and the other, but like the actual levels of injury and trauma that can sometimes arise in these environments don't always get spoken about. So I your courage in speaking of it.
Thank you. And it's taken me many years to get to this stage. Obviously we started having our chat a few weeks ago and I was like, this is time now, because before it was too painful and it was time. And so I was eventually, after a lot of kind of tests and being kind of taken to one place and then the other, I was diagnosed with a brain condition, which was as a result of this headstand, which was called Chiari malformation. And basically what had happened is my brain had slumped down a bit. So that gave me something to work with. It was like, okay, now I know what's going on in my body and I know not to stand on my head, and let this be a message to anybody that's listening that, we've got feet for a reason, right? But, it's just really, people would say, did you listen to your body? It's like, I listened to my body in the way I knew how to listen to my body at that stage of life.
Yeah. And I'm interested to hear is like, sometimes we look at an individual practice that has been harmful, but also I remember you were speaking a little bit about the context of the kind of the systems, the way that the yoga was shared and taught. Is there a sense that there's any kind of like connection between the harmful practices and us running towards those harmful practices and the way that they're shared? What's the nature of the dynamic in those teaching environments that maybe perhaps that is also harmful and not particularly empowering? I don't know if you're able to speak a little bit about that. I don't know.
Yeah, certainly. I certainly wasn't empowered. I wasn't invited at any time to become my own agent, really. And this was in various classes, you know, I was trying different teachers, but obviously it was, for whatever reason at that time, I was drawn into those spaces. And it was very much, you know, if you can't do that, if you can't do that particular posture, then you work and you work and you work and you work until you can do that. But
So
for what? For what?
For what I hear is that you're describing so accurately and have suffered so deeply from this. It's a perfectionism. It's a kind of driven, fundamentally, you know, harmful and disempowering way of teaching that I hear is and feel is rooted in much bigger systems of oppression, like that element of competition, commercialism and perfectionism is completely part of the whole like white supremacist capitalist yoga machinery that a lot of people are caught in. I don't know if you wanted to speak, because we did talk about dismantling more wider systems of oppression that are actually manifesting in the way people are teaching in very bossy, very harmful and very disempowering ways.
Yeah. And also to say that those teachers that are teaching in those ways only know what they know at that particular time of their life, because there was probably a time, if I go back, you know, that's how I'd started teaching, and you know, what a blessing that my body dismantled me before I could take that journey on any further and massage my own ego. Yeah, so it's, you know, and it's, to me, it's the kind of, it's the salesman or woman and the purchaser. I've got something to sell to you. I've got a posture, a gymnastics to sell to you. Are you willing to buy it? And you go into that class as you would go into a shop.
That's,
yeah.
And are there other ways, Tanya? Because I mean, we've been speaking this morning about the network of people that did provide support and nurture for you, the place that you're in now with yoga. Can we speak about like other ways that aren't about you will do what you're told, I'm in charge, I'm going to sell you this, and you will obey, basically by purchasing it and by practicing things that perhaps in the end are going to be deeply harmful to you, but I really don't mind so long as you keep buying it off me. So I know you're in a really different place with yoga now that's much more healing and nourishing. Could you speak about the outcome of this?
So it does have a happy ending. So I went back to teaching eventually once I'd learned how to kind of reuse my own body, and you know, part of my healing in that space was around just surrender, of sobbing my heart out and just, you know, really feeling years and years of traumas and other traumas as well, and not just the injury. It was like everything unpacked, and as everything unpacked, my heart really started to soften, so that when I did go back out to teach, I would go to I went back to the same class that I was teaching on a Saturday morning, which had been a mixed class. And I was like, you know, just bringing in this softness and this flow and this gentleness and embodied movement. I was like, let's forget about making shapes. Let's just be here. And the interesting thing of this was that the men disappeared and the women just started to gather. It wasn't a case of I had a switch from working with men and women to working with women. It's like my practice changed and shifted and transformed, actually, as I see it now. And the women just started gathering, and they'd start to come to classes, and we just, you know, just play with embodied flow. How does it feel to be in your body? How does it feel to just breathe? Do you want to just lie down on your mat? Do you want to just be here? Like, who are you? Who is this person, this being that you're bringing into this space? What do you need right now? And so it became this deeply honouring practice for each individual person. I was no longer the teacher. I was just there as a guide. You know, it's more of an invitation then.
Yeah, and I feel in how you speak about this, and in what I know of your own practice and sharing, that this is a truly embodied empowerment, because as a teacher, are able to embody healing yoga that is respectful of your rhythmic cycles, that is respectful of where you are on any given day, and to use it as a tool for inquiry, that's actually fully empowering, healing, and opens up all sorts of different ways of being with yoga. So it's really beautiful to actually feel that. It's like the teacher who steps into that place, as you have done, and as many folk have done, actually empowers others in a completely different way.
Yeah. And it really invites each person to be in their own authority, to stand in their power, and to inquire, you know, if you're not, it's like, well, what's holding you back? Where are there these belief systems that we have locked in? And that is the inquiry with yoga. It's like, what are we willing to let go of? Where can we surrender? And as women gather, you know, it is, you know, the saying of when women gather, magic happens. It literally is so true that when we gather, we saw a few weeks ago, just this interweaving of, you know, wisdom, stories, healing, tears, laughter. It's transformative.
Yeah. And I really would love, I'm so keen to share this message that there is the potential for transformative experience that is about healing and justice. And I wondered if you'd speak a little more about these wider experiences, looking at the yoga you've described, the commercial yoga world. It's a very white world. It's a world of like profit-driven perfectionism. And I wondered if you'd share some perspectives on your journey in that world and out of it as a woman of color, as a yogini who's like practicing empowering yoga. What would you like to share about that?
So there's so much in that, really. We could fill a whole day on this subject because it's really dear to my heart, and it's something I've been looking at, you know, very, very deeply for the last year and a half, really. Part of my own healing journey was to go to, you know, I was going to more restorative classes. I was going on into women's deep healing work, cycle awareness, and I would step into these spaces where, you know, I was so ready and open to heal the kind of systemic oppressions that we've had as women, firstly. And again, I'd find myself in this like white-centered circle. And so here I am, you know, hoping to heal in the same way that all the women with white skin are, but there's so many more layers for me sitting in that space. I'm the other again and again and again and again. It was only really, probably quite recently, to be honest, that I've actually started to go, you know, no, I'm done with that story. And actually, on one hand, I'd be stepping into those spaces, healing trauma or layers of trauma, and then I'd be applying more on top of it. So it was just this like seesaw of trauma, letting go, pulling in, letting go, pulling in. And I just started to speak out in some circles and say, what's going on here? It's like, where are the women of colour? What is preventing them from coming into these spaces? And it's, you know, it's the white supremacy. And so I've been really journeying with that and just looking at, you know, I'm a woman of, you know, Black heritage and white heritage. So I've kind of been blessed with both, I guess you could say, of, you know, an understanding of the Black side of my heritage, but also my own white supremacy, and really starting to look at the unconscious bias within me. And as a brown woman, it was still shocking. You know, there were so many little unconscious biases that would pop up, and they still continue to pop up, but I'm catching them. I'm like, no. And I started to have a voice, actually. I think it was after George Floyd where I really started to speak out publicly and go, you know, if we're in healing work, if we're women in leadership, bringing women into circles, bringing women into yoga spaces, we each have a responsibility to make that an inclusive, diverse space. And in order to do that, we have to take our own responsibility. And this is a kind of shout out now to all the white women in leadership, running, you know, and by leadership, I'm talking about running classes, running circles, that there is a responsibility as the person holding that space to understand racism and to understand what it is to be an anti-racist. And once you understand what it is to be an anti-racist, to actually become an ally. And that opens up a welcoming space, as I see it.
Yeah.
I see this generation, or my generation, as a generation that's healing this, that's clearing it, that we are like, okay, the plaster is off. We can no longer stick anything on top of this.
Yeah. Tanya, thank you for that shout out and for that call to awareness for all of us in the yoga world.
Yeah.
To really step up and realize that the levels of healing you're speaking of
Yeah.
require for an awareness that yoga is a tool that we can use for, I mean, svadhyaya is something that you can really understand. The self-study.
Absolutely.
It's not simply listening to the guy with the sage on the stage with his white beard, although they may have great wisdom to share.
Absolutely.
But it's also the study of one's own bodies, one's own self, and one's own, you know, set of inherited ideas, beliefs, connections that fundamentally put us into a place of actually needing to call that out. As the kind of, I see that we're wrapped up in it in the yoga world in a way that sometimes people don't want to speak about. But I really am really pleased that this shout out gets made, because I don't see, as somebody who's worked for gender justice for my whole life, I don't see how that we can actually achieve any of that without actually realizing that the deeper systems of injustice involve racism, and that actually addressing that is crucial. So
Yeah.
let's do that together. And the call for together, you're like all of us on board examining our own racism, our own collusion, and looking at even in our families that we're making. I mean, when we met because of our brown daughters coming together in a circle. They're there together and we can connect over that, and then say, well, what have we got within ourselves that's of benefit and healing that we can share, and what do we really let go of? So this is a real kind of like autumnal call to call that out and let go of what's going on. And then there's fruiting. And I love that we're calling in this generation and supporting the next generation of people of our daughter's age, of everybody's, you know, coming through. We're healing it. But to do that, we need to do it together. So I wanted to end up with just a little kind of like call out for the people on the web, maybe who've been of support, because you spoke about becoming allies together, working together to actually bring yoga into a space where it can be used for healing and justice. So what's been helpful? What's your web looking like, Tanya? Because we're one little thread on this web, and in our Yoni Shakti, the movement Facebook group, and all the campaign supporters, that's another web. But there are many webs, and they all kind of intersect. Could you speak a bit about the web you've woven in your own journey for healing and power?
So my personal web is, I'm surrounded by amazing women now. I'm so blessed. I really feel like my healing journey just opened up life for me in ways that I could never have imagined. And my sisters in my life are deeply nourishing, and it's, you know, real authenticity now. There's a realness, which is why I was drawn to the Yoni Shakti, you know, because to me it was real. It gave me that kind of framework really for the practice that I'd already started. And it was like, okay, now it makes sense. So the Yoni Shakti work, the circles around me are part of my web. You know, I run women's circles in person and online as well. And I also go to circles. And to me, it's not my circle or their circle. It's like we are just creating, and I see behind you the circle as well. We are here creating these circles. We're all within, you know, these different cycles of life and bringing in our wisdom. So there's so many, you know, to me there's so many women. I actually said to you before we came on, I've got all the little gifts, all the candles and, you know, circle stones all around me here, and it's like calling in the sisters to hold this space this morning, to have this conversation. And so the web is just, to me, it's everywhere. It's growing and it's growing, and yeah, it's so nourishing and so heart honoring. And I think as soon as we come into alignment, naturally it starts to flow.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
And I really I'm pleased to put out a positive message, because we can hear your journey with yoga is bumpy, painful, suffering, and I'm sure many people listening maybe also have encountered injuries and difficulties and coming up against racism and exclusion and profiteering, and all of this stuff joins up, but then also all the webs that bring the healing and awareness join up too. So I'm really giving a shout out to everyone who's supporting what's going on with Yoni Shakti, the movement, because I feel that a lot of the threads on the web there are nourished and then nourish all sorts of other activism and connection, and that together we're very powerful.
Yeah.
So
and there really is a deep sense of power in that group, isn't there? You know, when I log into Facebook and I go onto the Yoni Shakti movement, there's a sense of, yes, these women get it. We're here to transform this old patriarchal story.
Sorry, I jumped in.
Yeah, no, we really are. You know, we're here to change this story. We're here to dismantle this. And we know, each and every one of us within, you know, this Yoni Shakti movement, that there's work to be done every day.
Yeah.
It doesn't finish.
It doesn't finish, but we've got each other. You can't work on your own. So,
No.
so I'm going to call in a closing of our interview, and to invite you to share how is it, if people are inspired by what you're saying and want to connect with you, how can they find you, Tanya Forgan?
They can find me at tanyaforgan.com, so I can be found there on the web. If you just put Tanya Yoga Wokingham or Yoga Berkshire, I come up. I run women's circles in person, online, and I've recently started actually running a circle space online for women of colour. And this isn't there to kind of exclude white women, it's there to heal excuse me, women of colour, to bring a safe space.
Blessings on you and all power. These affinity groups, these circles, I feel are a source of immense power, and that actually they I really salute and honor that the creation of your circles, and I encourage people to build their own webs of connection around. I'm really delighted that you've made time to speak with me this morning, Tanya. Thank you so much. we could get back to our work of, you know, mothering and yoga, all these connections,
hoovering the house, walking the dogs. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, just really just also to say, you know, deep bow to you for the work that you're doing as well, because it's, you know, it's so needed. And you know, the journey takes us to that place, doesn't it, where it's like, this is needed, this is what you wished you'd had, this is what I wished I'd had, and here it is.
Yeah, and here it is, what we wished we'd had. We're offering it to our daughters. They can get a different experience, and to everybody's daughters, and to all of you listening and watching. I'm going to wrap this up now and invite for you to, you can connect with us. We're both in the Yoni Shakti, the movement Facebook group, and you can connect and become a supporter. Like, put your little butterfly on the web at yonishaktithemovement.com. And that's where I'm going to leave it to today, with great thanks and gratitude to Tanya Forgan. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Beautiful. I'm going to stop the recording now. Stop it. Stop the recording. Stopping your email. That's it. I just like to make sure that